the mission that picked Yugoslavia's future. In 1943, Britain was secretly choosing who would rule Yugoslavia after the war, without ever saying so out loud. One set of messages, one airlift pipeline, and one brutal arithmetic problem of German casualties pushed Churchill to abandon his old ally. And when the decision became visible, headquarters-level officers called it betrayal, because it looked like Britain had swapped a king's men for a communist guerrilla army. The question is, why did Tito beat Churchill's favorite, and what did London trade away to make it happen? The favorite was the royalist resistance, the Chetniks under Draža Mihailović, loyal, at least on paper, to the exiled Yugoslav king and backed early by the British. The challenger was Josip Broz Tito, leader of the communist partisans, operating a rival underground state and fighting a war of annihilation across the Balkans. By late 1943, the British were not only sending weapons, they were sending legitimacy. And the most controversial part is this: the shift was driven as much by radio signals, German paperwork, and airfield math as by ideology. A document that is still being debated, what exactly British intelligence proved about Mihailovic, sits right in the center of it. Balkans, the theater everyone wanted to use. Yugoslavia wasn't a sideshow. It sat on Germany's soft underbelly, rail lines, mines, oil routes, and the vital corridors linking Central Europe to Greece and the Aegean. After the Axis smashed Yugoslavia in 1941, resistance exploded, but it fractured instantly along political and ethnic lines. The British problem was strategic and brutally practical. The Allies were fighting in North Africa, then Italy, and planning France. They also needed to keep German divisions tied down away from the main fronts. The Balkans were perfect for that, if someone on the ground could force Germans to bleed and redeploy. At first, London's natural partner was Mihailovic. He was tied to the recognized royal government-in-exile. Supporting him fit the diplomatic map as it existed in 1941–42. But as the war evolved, a new map mattered more than flags, the map of German troop deployments and sabotage results. If one resistance movement made the Germans divert 10 divisions and another made them divert 2, that difference could mean thousands of Allied dead elsewhere. And then something even stranger happened. Britain began receiving streams of evidence, not speeches, not promises, but intercepted enemy messages and field reports, suggesting the legitimate resistance was not doing the job London needed. Key players, hidden motives. Churchill wanted three things at once. 1. Hurt Germany with minimal British manpower. 2. Prevent a post-war Balkan vacuum that Moscow could fill. 3. Preserve Britain's diplomatic credibility with the Yugoslav government in exile. These goals collided. Tito wanted power, not just liberation. His partisans built parallel institutions, courts, taxes, recruitment, and propaganda. They were not merely harassing Germans, they were preparing to govern. Mihailovic was trapped. His Chetniks were a royalist nationalist force, and their top priority increasingly became the fight against Tito, because Tito's victory meant revolution. In some areas, Chetniks also feared Axis reprisals against Serbian civilians and chose a cautious posture. British SOE, Special Operations Executive, officers in the field sent conflicting impressions. Some admired Mihailovic's early defiance, others reported inactivity, factional violence, and, most damaging, local deals with Italian and sometimes German authorities. Hello, listener, let me know where you're watching from. And if you don't mind subscribing to the channel and giving it a like, I'd be very pleased as the author. Enjoy listening. Meanwhile, British intelligence had an advantage that few partisan or Chetnik commanders understood: Ultra, the code-breaking product that read portions of German communications. Historians disagree on how directly Ultra convicted Mihailovic, but it clearly shaped London's sense of who was hitting the enemy hardest. A paraphrased way one British planner framed the policy was, support the force that kills the most Germans. Cold, but not irrational in a total war. From hope to doubt, the reports turn. In 1942 and early 1943, Britain kept trying to make Mihailovic the center of a unified resistance. Missions were dropped by parachute. Radios crackled. Promises flowed: coordinate, sabotage, prepare for Allied landings. But Britain faced repeated disappointments. German reprisals were savage, villages burned, hostages shot. This made sabotage politically costly. Chetnik units increasingly focused on protecting territory and fighting partisan influence. Italy's occupation zones created a gray area. Italian commanders sometimes preferred to tolerate or even arm local anti-partisan forces, including some Chetnik elements, to reduce their own casualties. That dynamic was poison to British optics. At the same time, reports of Tito's operations piled up, derailed trains, ambushed columns, seized towns, then disciplined withdrawals into mountains before German sweeps could crush them. The Germans responded with major anti-partisan offensives, large, named operations aimed at wiping Tito out. Those offensives were proof of value. If Berlin was dispatching thousands of troops and aircraft to hunt partisans, then the partisans were forcing Germany to spend resources. By mid-1943, London's question changed from who is legitimate to who is effective. Decision point, the switch becomes policy. The pivot was not one dramatic telegram, it was a cascade. First came the intelligence picture. British analysts compared German situation reports, intercepted messages, and field accounts. The pattern they believed they saw was stark. Tito's forces were in constant contact with the enemy. Mihailovic's forces were, at best, intermittently engaged, and at worst, cutting local arrangements to avoid fighting Germans while focusing on Tito. Then came the operational logic. The Allies needed Yugoslavia to be a German manpower sink while they fought in Italy and prepared for France. Tito offered continuous pressure. Finally came the political moment. Italy surrendered in September 1943, shattering the occupation structure. Weapons became available. Territories shifted. Whoever could seize Italian arms and fill the vacuum would explode in strength. Tito's partisans moved fast and grew rapidly. Britain chose to ride that wave rather than fight it. The mission in the title is shorthand for the British escalation. More liaison teams to Tito. More supplies. More air support. More public recognition. The true cost of this decision was horrific for British credibility with the exiled Yugoslav government, and deadly for local communities caught between rival resistances. To Mihailovic's supporters, it looked like London had picked a communist revolution. Immediate consequences, airfields, airdrops, and a new reality. Once Britain increased support to Tito, the battlefield logic reinforced the choice. Partisan-controlled zones began to function like a state in waiting. Makeshift airstrips were carved into valleys. Wounded were evaluated. Radios linked guerrilla headquarters to Allied command. British and American aircraft increased drop missions. A key multiplier was the ability to receive and distribute supplies. Tito's organization, centralized, politically disciplined, and ruthless, was well suited to that. The Chetniks, more decentralized and tied to local commanders and local survival, struggled to match it. Meanwhile, German commanders treated Tito as the primary threat. Major operations aimed at encirclement and decapitation did not end him, they often strengthened his legitimacy. And then the British faced a grim reality: they couldn't easily reverse course. Once you publicly treat one faction as the main resistance, you create momentum. Radios, airdrops, press releases, war is politics at 10,000 feet. The cost: civil war inside World War. The Allied choice did not just shape operations, it helped decide who would control Yugoslavia after victory. As Tito grew stronger, the internal war intensified. Partisan reprisals against collaborators and rivals escalated. Chetnik partisan fighting sometimes overshadowed anti-German operations. Communities were punished for supporting the wrong side. Casualty numbers in Yugoslavia are vast and disputed, and causes overlap: occupation terror, civil war, ethnic violence, famine, and disease. But the strategic outcome is clear: Tito's position hardened into inevitability. For Britain, the political blowback was severe. The Yugoslav government in exile lost leverage. Post-war influence in Yugoslavia shrank. Churchill's hope of shaping the Balkans against Soviet dominance weakened, though Tito later broke with Stalin, a twist Churchill could not confidently predict in 1943. The Allies had made a wartime efficiency choice, then had to live with its post-war consequences. What else could Churchill have done? There were alternatives, but each was ugly. Option A: keep backing Mihailovic anyway. Pros: preserves legitimacy and ties to the monarchy. Cons: if German casualties inflicted remain low, Britain gains symbolism but loses strategic impact, also risks being tied to local deals and inaction. Option B: force a coalition between Chetniks and Partisans. Britain tried versions of this, but it collided with reality. Tito's movement was revolutionary and saw Mihailovic as an existential enemy. Mihailovic often saw Tito the same way. Option C: split support evenly. This sounds balanced but tends to fund a civil war. It also reduces the impact on German logistics and troop deployments. Option D: direct Allied intervention in the Balkans. Churchill flirted with Balkan schemes, but Allied grand strategy prioritized Italy and France. Large landings in Yugoslavia required shipping, air cover, and sustained supply, resources the Allies guarded for Normandy and the Mediterranean. So Britain defaulted to a harsh wartime principle: support the force that produces the most military effect right now. Myths, ultra, and the collaboration debate. This story is still contested. Myth 1: Britain switched only because Tito was communist. The evidence cuts the other way. British conservatives did not want a communist Yugoslavia. The switch was framed internally as operational necessity, German attrition, and sabotage output. Myth 2: Mihailovic was simply a traitor. One interpretation is that some Chetnik elements made pragmatic local arrangements to survive and to fight Tito, not because they loved the Axis. Another interpretation is harsher, that anti-partisan priorities led to collaboration that crossed a moral and strategic line. The reality varied by region and commander. Myth 3: Ultra proved everything. Historians disagree on how decisive Ultra was, but it mattered because it let London compare claims against enemy reports. When German documents talk more about fighting Tito than fighting Mihailovic, decision-makers notice. A document that is still being debated is essentially the bundle of intelligence summaries and liaison reports that portrayed Mihailovic as ineffective or compromised. Critics argue Britain misread Balkan politics and overtrusted selected reports. Supporters argue Britain was reading the only scoreboard that mattered: German reactions. A paraphrased complaint from the royalist side was, "They abandoned us for a bandit." A paraphrased British reply might be, "The bandit is bleeding the Wehrmacht." Ending: the choice that couldn't be unmade. Return to the riddle: why did Tito beat Churchill's favorite? Because Britain ran out of room for sentiment. Yugoslavia became a wartime equation: German divisions pinned down, trains derailed, airfields carved from rock, and messages intercepted in silent rooms in Britain. London chose the force that seemed to deliver measurable damage to the enemy, even if it threatened Britain's post-war influence. But then something even stranger happened. Tito, the man Britain helped elevate, later broke with Stalin, proving that wartime choices can produce outcomes no planner can guarantee. The decision solved an immediate problem: how to hurt Germany cheaply in the Balkans. Yet it also helped decide who wrote Yugoslavia's post-war story. And in that sense, the mission did more than supply a resistance movement. It chose a future.